Hello everybody, what is up? Cobra here, and in this video we will be doing a turn-by-turn playthrough of my new game, Central Alliance. Now, I showed you guys in the last video about my two new games, the Axis and Allies World at War, and then this game, Central Alliance. And basically, for this game, I've taken the map art from the original Milton Bradley Axis and Allies game, and I've kind of reinterpreted it into a World War I game. So this is basically supposed to be kind of miniaturized global scale World War I. So you can see here we've got the beautiful 1980s styled artwork of the world map. And in this game, Central Alliance, there is only one faction on opposing the Entente, and that is the Central Alliance. You can see they're marked by different roundels for their different capitals, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. But they all operate as one, and basically this mode is based off of the original expansion set. I forgot who made it, but it was called Central Powers, which was basically a different setup for the original 1980s Axis and Allies board. So in this case though, you can see here that the Central Alliance consists here of Germany up here in the north and Austria-Hungary, basically probably fighting against the French and the Russians. They start at war with Serbia and Russia, though the French have the ability to attack them, and the British are neutral until either attacked, or if the Central Alliance goes after the French, or if Turkey is moved. Basically, Turkey, even though it is a part of the Central Alliance, these forces here are kind of soft locked unless the Central Alliance wants to bring Britain into the war. Same with Italy here, even though France controls Italy and Italian Libya, those units are basically neutral until either attacked by the Central Alliance or until turn 4, then the French player can use those. They are allowed to build here in Italy though. Over here we have America, definitely playing a little bit of a minor role in World War I, but in this game they are given a couple of options, one of which being called economic conquest, where they are allowed to pay money to basically try and align countries down here in South America. There is a possibility of Mexico joining the Central Alliance, and the Americans have a really cool ability, and in this game there is basically a type of support you can give each other called foreign aid. And for instance, here with America, they are allowed to load up, in their case, 2 transports with 1 unit apiece. So for instance, they could take that infantry and artillery, and they could sail it to either Britain or France and drop it off as a French or British unit. So they have the ability to buy units and send them over to Europe. Britain and France have the ability too. They are allowed to send units into Russia. And then across the world, just kind of a quick little overview of this game. You can see that the British Empire spans the entire globe. I've chosen a red for them just because of kind of it's a pretty symbolic British color. I've done that too in the powder keg. I always kind of thought it weird that khaki was chosen as the British color in most war games, just because I always associated red with the British Empire a little bit more. You can see here they've got India down here with Australia and New Zealand, along with Papua over here. Then we've got the Japanese, which are also lumped in with the British, similar to other nations here. I wanted to keep this game 5 players, 5 different kind of nations you can control, and that is why Japan is just marked by British units, the British Navy, and basically that just kind of goes with the World War I. Kind of, I connected them with Britain because they had a naval alliance with them, and they kind of worked towards the British aims of securing Central Powers controlled areas in the Pacific. Britain also cannot support Russia with actual units, so they could not take their units in Japan and transport them to Russia to be sent to other fronts. Other than that, you can see that the Central Alliance does have a sort of a colonial game if they want to try and take on the British. can see they've got a little squadron here based out of China, various cruisers and units over here in the Pacific, transport if they want to evacuate New Guinea, along with infantry in German Samoa. And then you've got over here a force in Southwest Africa, East Africa, along with another cruiser, a couple units here in Africa, or Northern Africa, Cameroon, and then Sanusia, which is tied with the Ottomans, can't be used unless the Ottomans want to pull the British in. And then a cruiser over here in the Caribbean, and also a sub down here, and a sub up there. Back to Europe too, you can see in this game the Central Alliance can actually kind of try and contest the seas. Britain still has a bigger navy, but it is split up, so if they choose to, the Central Alliance could choose and try and come out and attack the British, and then maybe deal with the other navy later. There are also mines in this game, similar to other, or Axis now is 1914, where you have a coastal mine, and that means that this sea zone, if enemy units move in, must roll, and on a 1 they are destroyed. Other than that though, that is basically the general overview, and like I said, I'll be getting back to you at the end of 1914 to show you guys what has happened in the first round. Alright everybody, it is now the top of round 2, and basically what has happened in this round was that the Central Alliance decided to go for a Russia first policy, and in this game they do not start at war with France, nor does France with them. So basically, if France declares war on the Central Alliance, then the British basically stay out of the war unless attacked until round 3. So in this case, the Central Alliance decided to go full into Russia and not worry about the French, as the French didn't want to pull the British into the conflict. So, or they didn't want the British to stay out. So as you can see here, the Central Alliance went into Russia and they got diced pretty badly. I don't know how they're going to fare for the rest of the game, just because in the Ukraine, they basically took like 2 infantry off and lost almost their whole force going in. They took Serbia with 2 artillery left, so definitely the Austro-Hungarian kind of force is now greatly depleted. The Turks didn't move just because they don't want to upset the British. The German, one of the German cruisers was able to meet up with the Austro-Hungarian fleet over here in the Mediterranean, and they're just sitting there. They've survived this turn as the French didn't want to fight them. So now they might be able to group up with their other naval forces and try and gain some naval superiority. The Americans sat tight and sent some forces over. They sent a fighter and artillery over to Europe. The Russians just kind of moved units up. You can rail in this mode, or this version of the game, so they were able to rail a bunch of their Siberian forces to the front lines. And then elsewhere, nothing really happened in Africa, but the Germans did try and do an amphibious assault on Siberia. They lost a cruiser and an infantry and artillery. And over here they've grouped up some of their naval forces and vacated German New Guinea. Alright, so I'll see you again in round 3. Alright everybody, it is now the end of turn 2, and as you can see here in Europe, the Allies have, or the British have been brought into the war, and they are now forming a massive defensive line here in Belgium against the Germans. The Americans are also gearing up with a larger army. The Germans, Ottomans, and Austrians came down here in a big attack in Egypt and ended up taking it out. So that is a pretty decent victory for the Central Alliance. Up here, while losing the north, the Central Alliance came in and took Ukraine pretty handily. They are spread pretty thin here. You can see though that they're a fighter. They do have an ace on the board after attacking and winning an air superiority combat for Ukraine. Over here, the British and Japanese fleets took down the German East Asia Squadron, and the Japanese took Sing Sao. And other than that, that is all that happened in turn 2. On to turn 3. And now, as you can see, The Russians are out of the war. The Central Powers was able to march in and end up collapsing them. So as you can see now, all Russian units are off the board, and all Russian territories are not allowed to be entered. Because of that, the Central Powers, or Central Alliance, has moved their forces back to the Western Front. You can see here the Allies have significantly built up, probably have more than the Germans, though now the German economy can be focused here in Europe. The British Navy was able to push in and destroy the German Navy, and they've placed down a few new units, one of their special units being an aircraft carrier that can hold 2 fighters. Over here in Africa, the Central Alliance have kind of solidified their gains. They did lose Cameroon and South Africa. The Americans aligned Colombia, Ecuador, and gained their army and IPC value. And over here in the Pacific, the British and Anzac forces have taken a few German colonies over here and defeated the East Asian Squadron. That was last turn. So, pretty eventful turn, and it'll be interesting to see where the game goes now that the Central Alliance can fight the Allies completely without having to deal with Russia. So we'll see you guys in the next round. Okay, so the top of round 5. Now, in Europe, the Germans launched a major offensive to whittle down the Allied air forces, but as you can see, they've reinforced again. Only about 6 infantry were lost on either side, so it wasn't really decisive. The British did come in, and they tried to reinforce their naval superiority here in the Baltic, but they lost their aircraft carrier to a mine. Over here in America, the Mexicans joined the Central Powers. They marched into Texas and the southwest US, but were pushed out, and the US was able to invade Mexico and take it. Over here in Africa, the Central Alliance has just kind of consolidated its forces up here in the north, preparing for some kind of battle up here in Egypt. They were able to come in here and take India. The US did try to launch a expeditionary force, but they lost those forces, so Germany maintains control, but the British might come in and retake it. Other than that, the last bits of war material, or IPCs, in the Pacific have been taken by the British, and the Austro-Hungarians build up in preparation for a march on Italy, which the Italian units are now activated for for the rest of the game. So France will be able to use the Italian forces here. Alright, I'll see you guys at the end of turn 5. Alright, so now it is the end of turn 5, and as you can see, the Germans and Central Alliance as a whole have made great breakthroughs in the West. So they launched an attack in Italy, not even expecting to succeed, and as you can see, they took it, along with an attack that was meant to whittle down forces in Belgium, but as you can also see, they took it down. Now, they did take significant casualties on their infantry, and they also lost their air force, but they took it. They were able to build another air force, and you can see here that we have the last vestiges of the Allied Expeditionary Force, which has been rushed here to France, along with the Americans. They definitely do have air superiority, so while the Germans do have forces that they could invade with on next turn, which they might, it'll be a pretty tough fight. The Americans are just now sending units over to Europe. The French were able to come in here and take back Egypt, so that was definitely a pretty major victory, along with the fall of German East Africa. So the Central Alliance game in Africa is now localized here to the Sudan, and the Ottomans will probably have to rebuild if they want to try and pull anything else. Over here, the Central Alliance have pretty much been wiped out of Asia, with the last bits of offensive power being here with the force that took India, but now the Anzacs came back and liberated it, and now you can finally see Anzac forces coming over, along with the transport up there in Japan, maybe ferrying over some more Japanese units. But other than that, a pretty eventful turn, and we'll see if, while the Central Alliance have lost much of their colonies, they'll be able to maybe take France and then a final objective say, in the US or Britain. Alright, it's the top of round 6, and it's been a pretty eventful turn. The French actually held out here, well, mainly the Allied Expeditionary Forces. There wasn't many French units left to defend France, but they held off an attack from Belgium and Italy, and they hold out once more. They might fall this turn, though, because of the decent stack of units that the Central Alliance is forming up. Other than that, there have been some leaps and bounds over here where the Entente has pushed up into the Ottoman Empire, and now they're pushed back here to Turkey. They've pretty much achieved naval superiority everywhere except for this lone German cruiser, which has been unsuccessfully convoy raiding. And other than that, that is pretty much all that's happened in this last turn. The British did research tanks. There is technology now available, so they will likely ferry those over if the French hold out. So we'll see, kind of a tipping point. If they can hold, we might see a pushback, but if the Central Alliance gets France, maybe they'll be able to start spreading again. Well, it's the top of round 7, and as you can see, another really eventful turn with the Central Alliance basically coming in and capturing France. So they had a pretty good run at basically securing that, but then the British came in here, landed in Belgium. Their tanks pretty much absorbed all the hits, so as you can see, they really didn't take any losses there, and Germany doesn't have much in the rear. And the Americans got amphibious landing craft technology, which allows them to carry an additional infantry on their transports. So they sent over a huge force here, attacked in France, and took down basically the bulk of the Alliance's artillery that was there in France. You can see too that the US has purchased a large air force to keep up air superiority, along with researching bombers, so they could maybe start bombing German factories. The Central Alliance, thinking that they had Europe secured, put a pretty decent purchase down here in Turkey with their tank and a couple more infantry, because they're facing a building up British army over here. And other than that, that is pretty much all that has happened in this last turn. We'll see if the Central Alliance may have a few more turns in them, but with more British reinforcements coming, they might have it pretty short in the next couple of turns. Everybody, I skipped a few recaps, but it is just because not much territory changes were happening, but it is now the beginning of round 10, and the Central Alliance definitely have it, are in their death throes, but they refuse to give up. You can see here they're fortifying Germany. They built a massive air force to try and keep up air superiority for the final assault by the Allies. The Allies pushed into the Denmark Straits here and have a big landing party and are waiting the right moment to land in Germany. The US have built a giant air force complete with bombers they've researched, and they're now starting a bombing campaign on factories. And in this game there's no AA, so you need fighters to defend them, and so they're basically able to fly in pretty unopposed. The only place and the US have landed in Greece too, so with the hopes of possibly building a factory on mainland Europe. Over here, the only success the Central Alliance have had are over here in Turkey, where they've finally secured their front line over here. Now, if they have any luck, maybe they'll be able to take Egypt. But other than that, that is all that's happened, and we could likely see the collapse of the Central Alliance in this turn 10. Okay, so it is now the top of round 10, and in Europe, the final battle is approaching. So, as you can see here, Germany's kind of turtling up right now, just building up a huge force to try and stave off any attacks. The UK, they came in here, they passed all the minefield checks, but once they got in, they really just didn't have the force to invade Germany after Germany reinforced themselves. The US bombers have done a number on the occupied Italian factory here, up at 15 damage. If that isn't repaired, it gets destroyed. So they definitely have air superiority whenever they decide to bomb a factory. Over here, the Americans landed in Greece, and as you can see, they have their bomber force landed there right now. The Ottomans are continuing their little soiree into Africa. They took Egypt, making decent use of that tank there, and there isn't too much Allied forces can do about it, so we'll see if they either hold that or decide to push their luck a little farther. Other than that, not much is going on except for here in Europe. We'll see basically if the Allies want to go into Germany anytime soon or build up their forces for that final assault. Alright, that's another turn down, and had some pretty big battles here on the Western Front. The Germans came in, took down a pretty decent chunk of the British Army in Belgium, but just kind of went in and went out. Over here, the Allies, France and America, sent forces to Italy. They lost not that much forces, but you can see they whittled down Italy's defenses. Over here, the Americans reinforced Greece. The Ottomans are still making headway, taking Aden and Anglo-Egyptian Sudan here, so you can see the Allies are kind of scrambling to prepare a defense. The Central Alliance have had a couple little victories this turn. Their cruiser came up here to America. It's their last remaining warship, and a U.S. destroyer came in, and it actually destroyed the destroyer. So the U.S. transports are still trapped in port right now. And over here in the Pacific, a lone German transport was sitting off the coast of South America, and it came over, picked up a guy on the Marshall Islands, and liberated Caroline Islands. So we'll see what they do with that initiative. There are 2 British battleships, and the British sent transports back to Japan to try and pick up forces to bring to Europe, but in this case, maybe they'll have to use it for that German transport. So, kind of eventful this turn. We'll see where it goes from there. Alright, with the end of turn 11, the Central Alliance have probably reached the end of their African expansion, as the US has deployed forces to Algeria, which will likely stem the tide there. Up here in Europe, you can see not much other than the Central Alliance pulled out of Italy, allowing the French to retake it, but since America had fully damaged that factory, it is now destroyed because it wasn't repaired by the Germans. So Italy's back, but there's no factory on the border. The Central Alliance pushed into Greece and destroyed the entire U.S. bomber force of 3 bombers, and then they also stole that factory from the U.S., so that was a pretty decent victory for them. They did lose their cruiser and their transport over here, so their navy is gone, and the British have reinforced Australia. Plus, they've sent the Japanese army on these transports, and they're coming over here because of the Ottoman expansion over here. So that pretty big, kind of interesting things happening globally, even as the Central Alliance have been pushed back to their home borders. So we'll see where it goes in the next couple turns. Alright, turn 12 is done, and a lot of Central Alliance gains have been eliminated. So down here, Australia is safe. Africa, they've been pushed all the way back up to Egypt again, although they are fortifying both in Egypt and in the Ottoman Empire. The French came in here, liberated Greece after it was taken by the Central Alliance, and they actually pulled out of Italy, even though they had captured it, just because the Austrian army was built up pretty big this turn, and then also, notably, the Germans pushed into Belgium and took no losses, and that is due to their big old stack of armor. And armor works a lot like Axis and Allies 1914, where it absorbs a hit, so they basically just absorbed everything and wiped out the British army, so they had to rebuild. And now everybody's scrambling back to France to hold off the second charge on Paris. So we'll see where that goes. Could the Central Alliance pull victory out of defeat? We'll have to see. Alright, the top of round 16, and in Europe, a bunch of big strokes have happened with the Central Alliance kind of coming in here from Belgium into France. They took down a ton of Allied infantry, and while the hits were fairly even, the Germans had more tanks to absorb those hits. So basically now the Allies are, again, trying to reinforce, but they have a lot of artillery, but not a lot of like hits to take if the Germans decide to come in again this turn. They did reinforce Italy, so it's not likely the Central Alliance will be able to come back and take it anytime soon. But at the same time, in the Middle East, they've definitely invested more resources in, and the Allies are scrambling, but there is a lot of Ottoman heavy equipment. You know, they've got tanks, artillery, and the Allies are just trying to throw in infantry. So we'll see if they can stem the tide there, or if this Middle Eastern expansion will keep on going. Alright, the end of turn 16 brings extremely interesting events here, where the German army moved in and crushed the French or entire Entente expeditionary force here defending France. They didn't quite crush them, they did lose a decent amount of infantry, but there was a ton of artillery that were lost, and the US bomber force in France, so plus the French economy that collapsed and will now have to be rebuilt. They did suffer a pretty significant setback where the British sent a kind of a suicide run into Belgium because the entire German Air Force had landed there. It was about 8 fighters and a fighter ace, and as you can see, they destroyed all of them. So that is going to take a lot of time to rebuild, as that's around 50 IPCs worth of fighters, and that ace will be difficult to get back. You can see though that the US have now had to divert up to the UK, and unlike the original time Germany took France, the US was able to come in and liberate France pretty quickly, but now they need some significant force to come back in, not only because of the giant stack of German artillery that can destroy a decent amount of forces, but that tank force, which is almost 20 strong, so that's 20 hits that they can just soak up with tanks. The only remaining Allied forces are a French and US force here in Italy, which is also France's new capital. The Egyptian forces are looking pretty strong now, considering that the Allies weren't able to reinforce any of their colonies down here. And over here, the Ottomans took out southern Iran. The British tried to come in here and take out some of those forces. They only got 2, and if the Central Alliance holds southern Iran, they get to roll for diplomacy to try and get Afghanistan. So if Afghanistan goes to Germany in the next round, India might fall too. Other than that, we can see that the Central Alliance are actually doing pretty good. A late game comeback, but they might actually pull through with a victory. They do need to capture another Allied capital, because these are the original victory conditions for the game, and yeah, we'll see, because with their economy, they might be able to start building ships to start spreading out. Well, it's the beginning of turn 17, and as you can see, Europe has been dominated by the Central Alliance. Now, I'll probably play a few more rounds, but I kind of see the end of this game leading to a Central Alliance victory, just because of the fact that the Central Alliance now dominates Europe, and as you can see, they've got a lot of forces. This isn't like a tenuous hold they have, and there really isn't a ton of Allied forces that can come in and even try to poke. You know, even if they were to take out Belgium, you know, the French and German defense forces can come in and crush that. Or if they came in and maybe just barely took Germany, they've got those Belgian forces to come back at them. And especially over here in Asia, the fact that the Central Alliance have kind of, you know, even when they were strong in the Ottoman Empire, they were holding there. But now that they've kind of broken the lines of the Allies, they're really just kind of going to go run amok around Asia. With the Afghanistani army, they pushed in and took India, even barely, but there's just no Allied forces that could really come in and enforce and counterattack. They might try something. You can see over here with Australian forces that can be moved up, maybe do a amphibious landing, because there isn't a lot of forces that can come back, but at the same time, Africa is pretty weak, even if a couple colonial infantry are raised. We got German armor and artillery that can come in. The Americans are landing in Algeria, but the Central Alliance now have a turn to raise some forces here to try to hold them back. And now you can see they're even starting to build a submarine, maybe some other naval forces to try and keep the Mediterranean clear of allies as the French brave the minefields here to leave the Mediterranean. Overall, pretty decent game. Definitely a crazy comeback. I was ready to call this as an Allied victory when Germany was pushed out of France and Belgium, but basically, they each side kept building forces, and then finally Germany bit the bullet, invaded, and in a couple turns was able to retake France, and through crazy odds kind of retook Europe. So we'll see in the next couple rounds where this goes. I don't think the Central Alliance will be able to take over, any other continents or the British island, but they are 10 IPCs away from an economic victory at 80, so we'll see. Alright everybody, and after 20 turns, you can see that the Central Alliance holds all of Europe, and the Allies have conceded victory. The Central Alliance have reached an economic victory, and they are, I think, 7 IPCs over their standard economic victory point, so there's definitely not much the Allies can do to take back anything if the game went on. I skipped a few turns just because not too much was happening, and then it really heated up in the last few. So you can see here that the Central Alliance invaded Spain and Portugal. They built a few more ships and actually came over here, took Mexico. They did lose their fleet, but they hold something in America now. They actually took all of Africa. This little force down here was able to do that, especially using these armor. Even as the British and French tried building infantry to stop their advance, they'd get one hit or something, and then the tank would absorb it. So that force pretty much moved all the way down, and they even have some reinforcements now just in case. You can see they pretty much hold all the coastlines here. They fortified. The Mediterranean is clear. It is now their little lake that they own. The Allies got wiped out turn and turn again as they tried amphibious assaults between the minefields and the German shore guns. They pretty much completely held off every attack. And then over here in Asia, it was pretty fun towards the end of the game with the Central Alliance coming into India. Then you'd have Australian reinforcements coming up, retaking it. But now this big army stands here, waiting reinforcements over here coming in from Iran. And this Burmese army was able to hold off one assault from this Indian army. But with those reinforcements, it's not likely to hold long. But overall, I will be doing a little review of the Central Alliance game as a concept, because you guys will be able to download it now. Yeah, I'll be covering that in the next video just because this one is pretty long now with all these little turn recaps. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this game go by turn, seeing all the ups and downs of it, when the Russians were at the gate of Germany and they fell, when Germany took France, but then had it liberated by the Americans, and then their eventual triumphant return. So hope to see you guys in the next one, and I hope you have a great day. Cobra, out.